Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mid-Curve Podcast, your weekly take on the world of crypto, DeFi, NFTs specifically. We are here as a group of investors, traders, semi-degenerates, and people with kind of interesting backgrounds in the space. Obviously, it's a very big, crazy news cycle weekend. We have a story that has gone from TradFi to crypto to DeFi to essentially front page news. But before we get into that, we always like to meet our panel quickly. I'm going to go around the horn, and then we're going to introduce a special guest. Eric, why don't you start? Give us the very quick background on who you are and what you do.
Hey guys, it's Eric, former TradFi asshole, now full-time NFT degenerate.
Great, that's perfect. Grant Lamb, what about you? What about you, Grant?
Hey everyone, this is Grant. I come from the traditional consulting world. In 2021, videos of basketball highlights lured me into this weird space called crypto. And now it's just traumatizing event after traumatizing event. So thanks for that, Groham.
That's a wonderful Top Shot onboarding story. Okay, Salty, you want to do a quick intro of yourself?
Sure, I'm Salty. I faded ETH when Vitalik introduced it, and now I design engineered biological systems. And eventually I realized that people degenning NFTs and tokens is just a giant engineered biological system, so I decided to apply what I know to this space.
Wow, that's actually much more interesting than I've heard you say in the past. At some point, we're gonna have to dig into that. My name's Funky Donk. My real name is Gavin Purcell. I am a media person. Fell into this space through a variety of different pathways. One of which was a B&B rug that got me addicted to the idea of what these things could be. But I'm now pretty deep in a bunch of things, including just a shitload of NFTs. So, and we have a special guest this week. Our special guest is Giancarlo. Giancarlo, what is your last name? Tell me your full name, because I realize I know you as Giancarlo. What is it?
Chaux, Chaux, Chaux.
French. Yeah, Chaux. That's right, Giancarlo Chaux. Giancarlo, give everybody in our audience a little basic intro on you and some of your background. I think probably quite a few people know you as the founder of Midnight Labs, but what else?
You guys have some great intros, by the way. Those were like some haikus. I don't know how I'm gonna follow up that, but yeah. So my name's Giancarlo. I make videos about NFTs. I now write a newsletter about NFTs. I just do a lot of thinking and talking, bullshitting about NFTs. I also sometimes release NFTs. Yeah, the one you mentioned, Midnight Labs, that's a private community, token gated community. But I've also done just a couple other drops. And yeah, before this, I was a stock analyst originally covering gaming. Then I worked at another startup doing research on gaming. So prior to NFTs, I've been already sort of researching and thinking about digital assets and people kind of spending money on things that only exist on the internet.
Great. Yeah, I think I want to talk at one point a little bit later on about private discords or token gated Discord groups, because I think obviously if you probably know out there, if you're listening to this, and also hello, Grant's mom. We've talked about Grant's mom as a big fan of the podcast. So hi, Grant's mom. I think the interesting conversation around this can be is like what can come out of private discords and what can come out of smaller discords rather than giant project-based discords. And I think that's a good conversation to have. But before we do that, we are actually going to skip our normal intro because there is a pretty significant story going on right now. We are yet again at another inflection point in the world of, let's call it crypto, but also kind of in the world of the general traditional economy right now. For those of you who I guess are stuck in a well this week, a Silicon Valley bank has essentially failed and is now, I'm not going to use the technical terms. I'm going to turn to somebody like Eric who can explain this better, but essentially the 18th largest bank in America has gone under. And this is a bank that had a ton of exposure to a lot of the startup economy, because it's where a lot of VCs and startups banked. And also, more specifically to the crypto world, had a lot of exposure. Circle, the company that has backed USDC, has a ton of exposure to it as well. So USDC last night depegged. So Eric, as somebody who kind of understands this probably much better than I do as a as an English major in the first place, do you want to like fill in the gaps of what I just said and kind of give people the basic story of what's happening right now?
Yeah. So to give it like some context about SVB, SVB was one of these regional banks that decided to hitch their wagons, obviously by proximity to the burgeoning startup scene, and grew to become a very large institution, primarily catering to startups. And so they were doing, and it was pretty well known that they were doing, I think, a lot of things that regular banks were not really didn't really want to touch, such as extending revolvers to early stage startups, lending to founders using their stock as collateral, underwriting mortgages for high net worth Silicon Valley individuals. And so, that was great, I think, during the sort of the go-go era of from, let's say, like 2010 to 2022, when you had relatively easy monetary policy, startups could go out and get a lot of funding. It's very easy for someone like SVB who cater to that ecosystem to grow the deposits. Obviously, 2022 was kind of an inflection point with higher interest rates. All of a sudden, the cash, burning startups that were their depositors couldn't raise new financing anymore. And you had this very aggressive reversal in deposit growth to deposit contractions. The problem that created for SVB that basically led to this was, they what they were doing is they were putting all of the deposits into the treasuries market to earn yield. But they top tick the market when yields on those treasuries are at 1.5%. So now with interest rates north of 3, you're basically a forced holder to maturity, because if you were to sell the T-bills on the open market today, you would get a pretty significant discount to what you paid for, and rack up losses, right? And when you're talking about all of a sudden like a balance of tens of billions of dollars of T-bills, the haircut is pretty significant. And I think like when they disclosed, when the press releases were rolling out, they actually disclosed that they ended up selling $21 billion of treasuries to fund the whole, and that ended up causing them to incur like almost a $2 billion loss, because they had to mark those to market, when and it's just when interest rates go from 1.5% to 3%, it's just very, very painful. Now what's happened is the regulators have basically seized the bank. The FDIC is in the middle of working out next steps. By Monday, all the FDIC insured deposits, which is up to $250,000, will be available. And it looks like they're going to announce that they're going to pay an advanced dividend to depositors for the non-FDIC insured amounts. There's a lot of information going back and forth from guys right now about how much that would be. Some people are referencing like when they did it with Fannie, that advanced dividend was about 50% upfront. But this is just sort of like it's probably too early to say this is systemic risk, but what's happening is this is a byproduct with higher rates, which obviously has stopped the tech growth sector flywheel dead in its tracks. And now that virtuous cycle is becoming a pretty vicious circle. And SVB, because they really did not have great risk management processes in place, is this things accelerated very fast, got out of control, and all of a sudden, you went from like a public going concern that had a market cap north of $20 billion towards, well, now the bank is in receivership, equity holders are basically going to get zero, and it's a question of like what are the deposit recoveries going to look like over the next couple of weeks.
Right. So it's definitely something that is evolving fast, right? Like I think that's one thing we can all agree on, that like especially when something like this, kind of really goes down in a big way on a Friday, the weekends are always like kind of both chicken littling, but also like people really trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. Grant, I think you might be somebody to ask kind of about this, about the Circle part of this and how it's affected USDC and kind of what's going on in the USDC world and what happened there. Do you think you can fill us in on kind of the background on that side?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll let Eric wax poetic on the technicals and the timeline here, but it's just uh, as it always is in big tech and crypto and likely other industries that I'm not qualified to talk on as well. It's social proof and social consensus, right? So while, under 10% of their liquid assets are trapped on Silicon Valley Bank, and the rest of it might actually, be T-bills that are already at maturity, or in banks that are still open for business. The fact of the matter is, like, no one wants to be the last out the door in a bank run, right? No matter how solid the remaining 77 to 92% of your assets are, and I think that's what we saw happen over the last 24 hours. I mean, it kind of went as low as 85 to 87 cents on chain, and even on some reputable exchanges here. So it'll be kind of interesting, I think, on a macro level to figure out how the remaining solvent players in Silicon Valley and also how the government takes it, right? Because clearly this isn't unlike other black swans in the last 12 months or so. Clearly this isn't isolated to crypto specifically, and it's more about the global liquidity pool being growing tighter and tighter as the macro situation works itself out. And it's kind of just a matter of, who do you throw the life raft to in this time of need, right? Strategically speaking, is it smart for you to let, hypothetically 40 to 50% of like high growth tech startups to die when that's kind of been your calling card over the last 20 years? Like, that's why people emigrate to your country, invest in your stock market. I guess we'll kind of see, right?
To add on to that, what we're seeing right now is why it's illegal to yell fire in a crowded theater. This is a demonstration of how much the underlying banking system is still really based on trust, and how when that trust goes away, it's very, very fragile, right? Because what like you could pin one of the major catalysts on this run, to basically Peter Thiel telling all of his startups to withdraw their money from SVB, which kicked off a push for withdrawals that I think racked up to like $42 billion. In any banking institution in the US or pretty much anywhere in the developed economy, if all of a sudden everyone decided that, hey, we wanted our money back, and tried to withdraw all of the money at once, every single bank would fail just because we operate on a fractional reserve system. So there are controls in place that where banks have to reserve a certain degree of a certain amount of capital to facilitate an orderly withdrawal process. But at the end of the day, like this is how the system is designed to work. All right, and what ended up happening to SVB, and I think what could happen to further banks if this is not contained, is really like you have a major duration mismatch in your in your treasury holdings versus where and like the amount of deposits you have to facilitate in your term. You then have to sell down those treasuries, which you probably bought when yields were low, for a big loss. That as a result blows a hole in your balance sheet that you will have to fill by finding additional capital, right? Like what SCB was trying to do this because they announced that, hey, we're gonna try to raise 5.81, like almost $2 billion of equity in the public market. And then their stock went down 60%, and it would trend it down like another 60% in the pre-market on Friday morning, which is basically the market's way of saying, well, we don't want to buy your stock. And then so that kicked off the discussion around finding a potential buyer. No one wanted to step in time, and as a result, regulators are basically saying, well, like that's it. We're calling it. So
Right.
now we're going through the receivership process. You could still theoretically see a buyer step in to take over the business, but that's really, really not guaranteed. So I think like the base case is okay, let the FDIC do its thing. How much is going to be made liquid up front to allow a lot of these startups and VCs to kind of make their commitments and payroll, and how much of it is going to be more of a gradual process where you have a claim. The loan book has to be unwound and liquidated to make whole on that claim. And maybe this is where like that secondary market arbitrage opportunity arises where a lot of these distressed funds like Baupost or Oaktree go around buying up claims that maybe like 80, 90 cents on the dollar, and they make that arb.
Yeah, it's interesting because okay, there's a couple things I want to get into here. One, before we jump in further on the financial side of it, actually, Salty, I have a question for you, and this is just something that I think is a good table setter for people who may not be as deep into this world as some people. USDC, people in the space consider a stable coin, which I think is a good. Maybe Salty, you can give us a definition of kind of what a stable coin is, and then if you can, as somebody who knows tokenomics relatively well, give us the explain it like I'm five version of how a stable coin, something that's supposed to be pegged to the US dollar, becomes unstable in this situation.
Oh, I'm glad you asked me about that because when you said earlier that it was depegged, I wanted to talk about that language a little bit because I think I think this can be confusing, especially because most of the stable coins we talk about have a peg, and when we say a peg, we say how much are they worth relative to a dollar. But we don't really mean a dollar. We really mean relative to USDT or USDC. So in a very real sense, USDC is the peg, or USDT is because USDT has been around a lot longer and is people outside the US like it a lot more. But everyone who's not USDC or USDT, and so yeah, so we talked about pegging with like things like Terra UST. That collapsed because it wasn't backed by a dollar. You have these stables, just briefly. There's stables that are backed by actual assets that you ostensibly can cash out that stable coin for the asset that backs it, a dollar equivalent. You have ones that aren't backed by dollars or dollars equivalents. So every stable coin has to maintain or defend their peg on chain and in the markets that are off chain. But that maintenance of that peg is keeping it equal to one USDC or one USDT or one USD. But a lot of these aren't traded on exchanges where you can get it into one USD. So Frax, DAI, LUSD, back in the day. I don't know about how BUSD does this. I'm not sure how much peg maintenance they do, but these non USDT USDC stables, they work. They do a lot of work to incentivize liquidity into pools to keep them at close to 1-to-1 parity with something else that is worth a dollar. USDC doesn't do that. USDC is not spending a bunch of money on bribes or tokens or incentives to keep the on-chain price of their token a dollar. All the things that keep it a dollar that you're trading USDC for are exogenous. It's not like Circle is going out there and bribing liquidity pools. So when
God, I
you
wish they
see
would. Maybe they will after this.
Well, no, but they don't need to. See, that's the thing. So the USDC is not pegged to a dollar. It's not. It is redeemable for a dollar. So if the market loses confidence that they can do that redemption, then the price will change on chain and in these off chain order books. That's all that's happening here. USDC is not pegged to a dollar. USDT is not pegged to a dollar. That terminology is very confusing because it's inaccurate. It's just worth a dollar allegedly. If you don't think it's worth a dollar, that you can trade it for a dollar or dollar equivalent at an actual place off chain, then you're not going to pay $1 for it. And then all the other stables in the world, they work very hard to be actually pegged on chain through complex arbitrage mechanisms. They work very hard to be pegged to the value of USDC and USDT, assuming that USDC and USDT are themselves redeemable for $1. So USDC has not depegged because there is no peg. USDC is just trading at a negative premium because there's some lack of confidence in the ability to redeem it. I don't I don't see any reason to believe it's not going to be redeemable for $1. Uh, so it seems like an easy arbitrage, but we don't know what will happen Monday. And Coinbase did halt its swapping because they don't have all that cash just sitting on hand, especially over a weekend. But that's just Coinbase. Oh, GUSD is another example of this, that like you as a person can have this with GUSD is Gemini's dollar. If you own GUSD and you send it to Gemini, no matter what the on-chain price is, you always get $1 from Gemini. That's how USDC should be, but most people don't have accounts with Circle where they can go to Circle directly.
No, so here's my question about Circle, and this is the thing I think I would like clarity on, is that supposedly Circle has, and this again, this is, I always say this to everybody, Giancarlo, you'll appreciate this as the kind of English major of the group. My job here is to kind of like unpack this shit and try to make sure I understand it, because all the other three of these guys are very smart. I think, Salty, my question is, I saw a story that Circle had 25% of the liquidity in USDC at SVB, and is that part of the reason why this is happening? And then technically, is the if say that money is unrecoverable, does USDC then have like a value of 75 cents literally because 25% of the money is wiped out? Or like, what's the background on that side of it?
Yes, aside from the details, that's the kind of math at least crypto Twitter people are doing. But
Right.
yeah, do that math and then say that's what a USDC is worth is like, there's, in my mind, there's all this stuff going on in the macro world that Eric and Grant can talk about so fluently. And then there's all this stuff going on with, Circle themselves, and we don't know all the details. And then there's all this stuff going on chain and in these exchanges order books, and those are connected, but they're separate things. And so in my mind, there's only two scenarios: you can redeem a USDC for $1 or you can't. No, and maybe there's something where you redeem it for 75 cents, but I've never seen Circle propose or allude or say that they would do anything like that. So if the money's there, it's redeemable, and if it's not, it's not. And then there's a regulatory like question with stuff, but I don't know. I think this is what we're really seeing is it's just that the price of USDC on chain is totally up to people and their confidence trying to arbitrage it. Circle does not maintain that price. They don't actively defend that price, and so it's just liable to market actors.
The specific amount is $3.3 billion, right? Which, if you wiped out theoretically on the latest numbers, would probably mean like 0.91 to 0.92 cents for USDC in terms of what's quote unquote backed or redeemable. But the tricky part is right now is I think to make that work, they actually have to halt redemptions, which is what I'm hearing that they've done, because
Circle has halted redemptions.
Circle apparently is halting redemptions, and where they're pausing them, because this is where it's always negative EV to it's always positive EV to yank in a bank run, and so the I think the risk here is that if people see that oh, like only 92 cents is backed, everyone who can redeem is going to redeem, and then a bigger that $3.3 billion that's not that we don't have great visibility into on the recoveries becomes a bigger portion of the residual deposit base. And so that's really like the risk that I think that's one of the reasons that they pause redemptions, because like if Circle went from like $40 billion to $20 billion overnight, right, all of a sudden like the backed amount goes from like 92 cents to like 80 cents, and it just becomes a very vicious like spiral. And usually that's why bank runs are so bad.
And I think what we saw overnight was just a insanely terrible PR job by the Circle team. And the fact that we didn't hear from Jeremy at all. Did you like throw your phone into the ocean or something? And the second point is like speculation, right? When there's no one communicating to you and no one is actively defending the peg, people assume the worst, right? So when you look at the overall numbers, like zoom out at the highest level, out of $42 billion, of which is supposed to be redeemed, 34 are in short-term T-bills, like 4 months or less. That's how I would define it, right? So people were, I think, thinking, what's the worst case here? That every single bank outside of SVB that Circle has money and goes under, right? And obviously we're talking endgame worst case scenario there, and that would put us at 77 cents on the dollar, which is I think why we went as low as like 85 to 87 overnight. And it's just, I don't know how you can excuse this kind of thing, right? Like you don't work Monday to Friday in crypto. You can't.
Yeah. I think actually this is a good question for Giancarlo as well, because I think one of the things this gets at is the psychology of markets, right? And I think it's interesting to ask you, Giancarlo, as somebody who like kind of manages, a pretty large community online, but also kind of like, trying to figure out how you tackle the question of this. Like, do you have, I mean, just as a personal question, like what's your take on this, but also like, when you're in charge of a community, like, you feel some responsibility to tell people about like better ways to behave during this time. Obviously, there's people in the space who are very new to stuff, and there's people who have been doing it for a long time. Like, how do you deal with communicating out like real information in times like this?
Well, communicating real information, I don't know. I feel like everybody, the Discord that I'm in, it tends to be people that are pretty plugged in already, and are on Twitter doom scrolling. And so, sometimes I highlight certain tweets that might be relevant, but I'm sure the information is flowing pretty quickly. And also a couple days ago we had like kind of like a venting session where everyone, just because you think of the past 12 months, there's been just a series of these episodes. And I think a lot of people would have preferred just like a nuke to zero and then a rebuild than what we had, where it's like 2 weeks of peace, 1 week of crisis, on and off. And so, part of it is people are getting a little numb, but they're also just like super frustrated that is whenever if it looks like we're out of the woods, there's some clawback. And so we were just like venting, like everyone just talking about like the things that they hate. But in terms of market psychology, the one thing I'll add to this, because I don't have anything too smart to say on the like the high finance machinations of what you guys are talking about. But one thing I noticed was, I went to Blur today and I just saw a bunch of red, right? Like all the NFTs are down as well, some 20% or more. And it's just always funny to me and kind of sad how like something that happens to like some regional bank in California flows through to like this crisis with the stable coin, and then leads to somebody just like not wanting a crypto dick butt anymore. It's just like the demand drops for some random meme, and that's just like a sign of how much overlap the NFT space still has with people who are crypto traders, who are into DeFi, who are just unrelated completely to the arts and creativity and everything. Like I don't think Roblox demand dropped today, for example. Like I don't think people are buying less V-Bucks on Fortnite, but they are buying fewer crypto memes, and that kind of sucks because it also pauses what's happening in the NFTs, because now founders are going to delay announcements for projects, or they might delay their drops completely just because the mood is so bad and it's hard to compete for attention. And then just onlookers are going to say like, oh, this space is unstable because every time there's this financial crisis somewhere, it just flows through into the space like without any friction whatsoever. The whales just immediately dump memes. And so that kind of sucks because it definitely, I think in the future it'll change once we have products that are actually bringing people with that actually have like consumer demand for these things, as opposed to just looking at them maybe as shit coins or just another extension of their portfolio. We're not there yet, and so it really is like at the mercy of whatever's happening in finance. But I'm just looking forward to that because this is like a huge distraction. Like it's not relevant to 99% of people. At least, we're never going to fully decouple. Like this is an interconnected economy, but it definitely feels like there's a huge overlap that probably shouldn't exist here. I don't know. That's my sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We talk a lot about that idea of like the trader dominated world of NFTs and how like there is this big crossover. And I think obviously, when you look at the risk factor, when you just think of NFTs as investments, they're on the far, right side of risk. And it's interesting to see how like there's a different version of contagion, right? Which is like almost like trickle down contagion, which it's like psychological contagion and people get freaked out by it. And I think, the other side of it, which always is interesting to me about the NFT market, is you've got a lot of kind of like people who got into this space who weren't traders before, who now kind of believe that they are traders. And instead of being smart traders, they tend to panic. So I think you see a lot of panic in times like this, which is kind of scary as well. Well, Eric, I want to go back to you real quick, just because obviously this is the big thing before we move into anything else today. Like, where do you see this going this week? Like, I mean, is there a prescriptive thing we can tell people that you think is going to happen? Like, obviously, bank runs are bad. I think we can all agree with that. Do you think the government's going to step in here? I know, like David Sachs, like the guy, the guy who's essentially the champion of decentralization, or from the VC, has called for the government to step in. Do you think that's going to happen here?
Yeah, like it's just funny because all of these libertarian VC dudes went from having like the fountainhead fucking strapped to their foreheads to holding like the little red book,
Exactly.
like in the course of like 8 hours, right? But yeah, I like the government hasn't fixed this, right? Like, look, I do think that the government will step in here. I do not think that they're completely like, up, just unaware of the fact that if they don't do anything, it's just going to be really, really ugly for the tech sector. And this is obviously also not how you want to cool inflation.
Yeah.
I think like by tomorrow or Monday, I think you're gonna have a bunch of announcements from the FDIC on next steps. It's gonna create, I think that in itself, I think will calm some very frayed nerves about how companies get financing and make payroll, and do all sort of the critical things that they need to do for business continuity. But then, like, my view is that you're going to be able to get some money out. The rest of it will be a process that could take, some matter of like weeks to months. But overall, like we have, I think a relatively durable regulatory framework for how to manage these liquidations, especially post the financial crisis. And I think overall, broadly speaking, most people will be made whole. Well, with that being said, I do think like Circle is gonna face some impairment in their business post all of this, because one, like, everyone has alluded, like just the PR response has been fucking atrocious.
What do you know? It's another terrible PR response from the crypto NFT business. Who knew?
Yeah, you would think for a business that I think up until this point was probably one of the few remaining decacorns in this space, there would be some incentive to come out and say, hey, like, this is going to be okay. We're going to remain sort of the reserve stablecoin of note in crypto. And please trust us. But instead, like we've gotten none of it, right? And it's a little infuriating because the reason Circle was raising most recently at like a 9 billion plus valuation was because right now it's actually a very, very profitable business. Like they were earning 3% plus on those on that $42 billion of deposits, across like the basically the treasuries portfolio. So this business was clocking in like north of a $1 billion a year. Right? Like and we talk about like real yield profitability in like Web3. Like I think Circle was one of the few businesses that actually had it. And now because of what's happening, I think at the very least, like you're going to see some shrinkage of the USDC float. You're going to see some distrust built into USDC, and that's just going to really like at least in the near to medium term, probably impair like how that business grows, which is a shame.
How is it always that these money printer businesses like just fumble the bag so hard? It's like Circle is just a money printer, and they're just like, I mean, you guys defend the pet. We're not putting money on chain. I mean, you guys decide if it's worth $1 or not. Like, just no tweets, no. I mean, it's a money printer. It's incredible. It's like the more profit, the more easily they make, the less competent things become. It's
Our guy Jeremy hasn't tweeted, but he has retweeted Bill Ackman, basically begging for a bailout from the government.
So he's retweeting the guy who said, "I think SBS
Yes.
is telling the truth."
Yes.
Oh
yes.
God,
Yeah.
lovely. Oh my God, that's crazy. Well, actually, Salty, I have one more question for you before we move on. So, like, there's been people online who have said, like, this is why Bitcoin was created, right? For things like this. Like, this obviously, the Bitcoin maxis, or the people who came into Bitcoin through the financial crisis of 2008, are kind of seeing echoes in this. I don't know. Do you see like Bitcoin or other kind of like pure crypto tokens as like this a positive for them, or is this just a negative across the board because of how the system works?
I mean, the real answer to that, I mean, time will tell, because everything's so up in the air just in the next couple days. But I do think, I mean, I'm not in all the private chats, but even GCR talking about this is what Bitcoin is for. Like, yeah, I mean, this is a real consideration. Like, imagine, okay, you're not a full normie, but you're a person like us, and it's like, oh, uh, the stable coins I thought were stable are still risk assets to some extent. Bonds are definitely risk assets, as these banks are showing. Maybe there's contagion risk. There's no like good bank out there that actually holds your money, right? You're just becoming a bank's creditor when you deposit money. In that kind of world, yeah, I mean, you look at ETH and Bitcoin, you're like, wow, these are truly inimitable, unique assets. Like, if I hold Bitcoin, it's like one of a very small number of assets I can actually just hold. No trust, no being a creditor, no bailouts, no nothing. I mean, I don't think that narrative's ever going to fully supplant like the global banking system. Like some maxis want to happen, and maybe it's not good that it does because we need high velocity of money and rehypothecation and stuff. But yeah. I mean, if you get everything cashed out and you put it in a bank, what do you own? You own you're a creditor to the bank. You own some debt, and you hope, by God, that bank will pay you back when you ask for your money back. I think people, when they wake up to that, are like, oh, I'd like to own stuff that isn't like that. So if I could, I would put my money in a bank that promised to hold it as just cash, hold it as real actual cash, and not lend it out and they don't have to pay me any APR on it. Can't get that bank though, so I have crypto instead.
That's really interesting. Actually, that's an interesting thing. Like, it's not a business then, right? It's almost like a weird thing, and it becomes something totally different.
Stablecoins themselves are kind of this manifestation of the linkage between Web3 and the traditional finance world, right? And this is, as long as as long as stablecoins exist, that's always going to be the case, right? And with USDC, you're actually seeing how pervasive this is, because people are like, well, I'll just swap to another stablecoin. What are you going to swap to?
Yeah.
DAI is mostly backed by USDC. Frax is heavily backed by USDC.
Frax is like going to all USDC now.
Yeah, like you're gonna swap to USDT, which is basically the devil that you don't know. So at the end of the day, like, as long as you kind of think about things in US dollar terms, and you have these stable coins that approximate the value of a US dollar, like, there's always going to be linkage to that traditional finance world. And Salty is right, like, to actually sever that linkage, we have to kind of think about ETH and Bitcoin as the sort of the stable reserve currency of the internet. And these are truly decentralized, censorship resistant currencies that aren't subject to the monetary policies. Well, in theory, any of the monetary policies of a sovereign government, right? But that's some ways off, because unfortunately you cannot pay your mortgage or your bills with Ethereum tokens yet.
Yep.
I have tried with Connet. They have not played well.
And they that linkage is there, and Oh, like, yeah, we're all going to need dollars for the foreseeable future. Like you said, you can't spend ETH and Bitcoin with frictionlessly, and I think that's okay. And what's here though is it's like if people could buy a gold dollar that was backed by gold, a lot of people would do that because the gold would actually be there. Let's say, and with Bitcoin and ETH, we have that. I forget what the name of the Bitcoin project was, but there was a Bitcoin backed stablecoin. I think it still exists. On Ethereum, you have LUSD, you have MIM, and you have Beanstalk, God rest their souls, and you have some other projects where you can get a dollar. Now, of course, none of these have perfectly lasted long term, so there's risk here too. But that is a very valuable thing, in theory, and I think in practice is it's worth a dollar, but it's backed by an asset that doesn't have bailouts, that no government can stop, that's uncensorable. That's unique. Where else does that exist? Euro dollars are backed by bonds. You can't buy a gold backed dollar. It's a very unique value proposition because you still want dollars to buy food, but you don't want them backed by made up debts that the government can make appear and disappear at their whim.
Right. Okay. Well, this is all fascinating. Obviously, this story is changing very quickly by the hour, really. Before we move on, because I do want to get to Giancarlo and dig a little bit deeper on his stuff. Does anybody have any last words on this they want to get out?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Pac-Man for doing this to us. Clearly, blur manipulating the NFT market just created this domino effect that caused the end of banking really in America. So thanks.
Hashtag Blur's fault. Get that trending and we'll see how it goes. Okay, let's move over. So Giancarlo, why don't you tell us a little bit about like kind of a little bit more about kind of your background, and then also kind of like what caused you to create Midnight Labs, which I do want to talk a little bit about as like kind of like a smaller Discord that is not necessarily it's not PFP based, but it's not like built around a project that is like a big public thing that had a big launch. It's a smaller rollout. Like, what was the kind of idea behind Midnight Labs in the beginning?
Yeah, so I guess on my background and why that might relate to this. So as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time in my career just kind of thinking about digital assets and following this like trend and this movement towards the internet and just spending more time online. And in gaming, that when I started covering gaming, that was really visible when it went from like the physical world. You go to Best Buy, you buy like these discs for $60, and that was kind of the end of the relationship to most of the value now coming from like V-Bucks and season passes and all these digital assets. And we're seeing just now the next evolution of that with, I think, NFTs and just crypto in general, and it's just going to keep going, right? Like every year, I think it's going to be more than the prior year in terms of time spent online. There's some people that say that maybe AI will make the internet sort of unusable. I don't know that, but that could maybe reverse. But aside from any like weird black swan event like that, this is just going to be this predictable linear curve, and so we're all going to be spending time online, and we're interacting all the time. But that's one of the key things that we're looking for is sort of connection and interaction. And social media, I guess, satisfies some of what we're looking for, where there is interaction, there is, we're exchanging ideas and information, but you don't normally get the connection from social media that you'd probably want. And so, that then leads to maybe having these private groups and having these potentially tokenized communities being like one of the leading things that we're spending time on online. And so, Web3 started that with the PFP groups, I think. That was like the first big wave of tokenized communities, where you would have something like a Bored Ape Yacht Club that acts as like an access pass into this private community, and that's supposed to be, like this new paradigm shift. The problem with that was that, it bringing 5,000 people together in one day into the same Discord without any real like shared common ground.
It's a disaster.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense when you think about it. It's just like, okay, why are we all here? Because we all like Bored Apes. I mean, it's sort of dumb, and it goes against everything that we know about how organizations work in the real world. Like, we figure this out over the past like 1,000, 2,000 years, right? It's like every organization has certain rituals and filtering and ways to curate the community. And that was just like kind of non-existent in any of these profile pic discords. And now if you go back to it, it was sort of predictable what was going to happen. And now we see it where, people were sort of all wagming together when the price was going up. Once it went down, everyone left. And 99% of these discords that were popping, a year ago are now ghost towns. There's just like a lone and that Discord announcement every now and then, and a couple people responding. And so when I started Midnight Labs, it was sort of before the application meta. So I think we were one of the first, if not the first, to do applications. But I was like, okay, we have to filter somehow. And so the application was just you had to hold one of like, there was like a long list of NFTs. You just had to hold one of them just to make sure you weren't like a bot, and that you were somewhat serious as a collector. And then we would just go through people's Twitters and all these like not really doxing, but just what is your presence online. And then we just try to curate this community month by month, because how we do it is through cohorts. And I think that's super key for building a culture within a community. You can't just have people come in one shot. I was sort of learning or someone inspired by Nouns, which is one a day. And it was very cool to see like, every day in the Discord, you would see the new person come in and be like, hey, like I'm the new Noun. And I really liked that. And I wanted to have that same sort of excitement and bring that into, what we were building with Midnight Labs. And so I do think like every month when a new cohort comes in, it's fun. It like reinvigorates the community. It's like, oh, we have new friends here. And it doesn't destabilize the culture too much, because we have been building this over almost a year now. I think we're coming up in a year. And I think that there's no way around that. There's no shortcut unless you have like a very, very specific interest-based community where the people that are coming in are already aligned in some way through that. It's very difficult to shortcut, just the slow build up of a culture. And then there was a couple other things we did, like it was free. We didn't want people to have that, customer relationship where they're just demanding things because they pay to get in. So it's free. Everyone should act as a contributor. And then we use tokens as a way to incentivize certain things that make the community better. And so like, you get rewards if you do like presentations on things that people might care about, or if you nominate other people that end up making it into a cohort. So these like non-grindy, discrete events that actually make the community better, you get rewarded for that. And that seems to be one of the best reasons why we have a token. I sometimes think about like, why does a token exist? That's one of the main reasons why it's still relevant.
No, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me about being in this, and I think just a quick disclosure, like I think me and Grantland and Eric are all in it. Salty, I don't know if you're in it, or you're not in Midnight Labs, I don't think yet, right?
Dude, you're really singling me out here.
Well, that's all right.
I know. I'm the only one not.
Yes, we should have you be. We should Salty. Yeah, you should apply for it, because I think you'd be a good member of it.
Send me the application.
Yeah, fill it out. One of the things I think that's interesting, Giancarlo, to me, is as somebody who's like not like an uber financially motivated trader that much anymore. I mean, not that I somewhat am, but like I love the idea of what you're doing with the rubies and the tokenomics, because like it does allow some people to earn out something where they can like essentially do work and then make value, because I think you do allow people to sell passes at some point. There's a slight difference in that. Like, but for me, who's just like really happy to be part of the community, like I don't necessarily have to. I didn't have to pay to get in. It was more like social capital to get in, which is kind of a cool thing. My question for you in some ways is, how do you deal with the dynamic of people who do like kind of work for rubies eventually to sell a pass? Like, do you ever have issues with people that come in to the project buying in rather than people who are kind of opted in? Like, how do you deal with that balance?
So yeah, the two ways to get in is you either come in through a cohort and then earn enough, as we call them, rubies, is our internal currency, to earn a token, or you just buy one like off OpenSea or any secondary market. And the people who buy off of that, I mean, they paid already some price to get in, but we still don't give them like full access to all the Discord's benefits unless they go through a cohort in the future. And so we
Right.
still want them to go through that, like, quote unquote bonding experience of being in a cohort. As part of the cohort, there's like a bunch of like one-on-one calls you have with other people in your cohort. You get to meet them. And you can unlock the rest of the Discord by doing that. And so we still have them go through this kind of culture building exercise. And so I haven't really seen an issue from that. And in terms of like marketing, we do very little marketing. I think I've tweeted like 3 times from the main Twitter. And at the beginning, that it was a little confusing why I was doing that. I didn't want to hype it up too much. I didn't see the reason why I would do that. I'm always confused why communities do that. It's all it does is it's going to pump the price temporarily, and then now have a bunch of people who bought the top and are in there kind of frustrated, and maybe poisoning the environment a bit. I have no idea why you would want that. And so we don't do really any marketing. It all is word of mouth at this point. And as the base of people in Midnight Labs grows, the number of nominations we get, because that's one of the main ways to earn a token is through nominations. The number of nominations just keeps growing every month, and we're getting like increasingly larger and better cohorts every single month because of the nominees that everyone is giving us without any kind of marketing whatsoever, which I think is cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Hey, Grant, I have a question. So you were in, I think, Midnight Labs significantly earlier than me. I'm kind of curious as like your experience in that space and seeing it grow, and kind of like what your experience with Midnight Labs as a community is versus, say, other ones you've been in.
I think it's pretty simple and straightforward for me. I think I bumped into Giancarlo in CyberCons initially. I was looking for, content creators who had like a good, like level-headed view on things, let's just say. And this was while, I was still on my full-time job, so I didn't have as much time to look at, the future of finance and one-of-one art and stuff like that. So yeah, it always struck me as someone who had, a balanced view of things and wasn't trying to pump his own bags. And, I'm usually supportive of anyone in this space as long as they're A, like, not hypocritical, B, not a liar or a scammer, and C, just, generally, someone with integrity and purpose. And I think Giancarlo perfectly fit like all of those buckets for me. And I think Minute Labs, and I'm sure he would agree with me, is more, a credit to the people that are in there, right? Because they're the ones who are building cool things or, bringing intel to the table. And he's, implicitly reaping the rewards without, actually taking money from people, which is, he's deemed it not necessary right now at the moment, and more importantly, it's just not the time to be monetizing your community or your fan base, as most people would agree with.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Giancarlo, one thing that's interesting about what else you do is your experience working with YouTube, and I think that one of the things that I noticed when I first got into the space is how few people were, in Grant's words, like reasonable YouTubers around the NFT space. You saw a lot of people who were, especially in the token space, you saw a lot of YouTubers out there tracking tokens and hyping shit up. And in the NFT space, you saw it as well. And this kind of also permeates into the Twitter Spaces world. Like, how do you approach making media about this stuff? Like, I think I always appreciate your YouTube videos, and YouTube is a very specific place to make content. Like, what is your approach to making media, and how do you kind of find that balance between like the audience that is going to want to see this stuff versus the audience you kind of want to expose yourself to?
Yeah, when I started on YouTube, I didn't know, like, I never followed crypto YouTube before making videos, and so I didn't know the reputation that it had.
Yeah, you didn't see all the crazy chart guys, all that stuff beforehand?
I never did. I never would watch like Bitcoin videos or anything like that. But yeah, it is quite a world. But yeah, I found out pretty quickly as I like started doing like, I guess, competitive research on other channels, but then also just as I would tell people, oh, I'm making videos on this stuff, and it'd be, there'd be an instant baggage of things that they would believe about me, just based on that. But yeah, basically, I just like, when I entered the space, I was like, okay, I want to talk about this stuff. I want to make content, and I want to build an audience, because this is, at the end of the day, it's an attention economy. especially with NFTs. And so like, one of the most valuable things you can do is just build an audience and get attention. That is the highest currency, I think. Like people spend insane amounts of money to get attention. And so I was like, all right, I want to do that. But on Twitter, there's a bunch of people on Twitter, and on YouTube there was only like Maddie, DCL blogger, making videos about NFTs, and he would really just talk about metaverse land and Decentraland, which I never found interesting. So I was like, all right, I'll start a channel and I'll talk about Bored Apes just came out and VFriends just came out, like sort of like early 2021. And that I kind of just rode the bull market wave on that, and that was it worked out. But yeah, in terms of like creating content and trying to, I didn't really gravitate towards like this is the next 100x NFT. I did maybe a couple of hyperbolic titles in the beginning, but then quickly found out that I was like, this is a losing battle. You're going to get the wrong sort of crowd that will move on as soon as like the space no longer is providing those gains. They're just going to move on to whatever they were doing before. I don't know, sneaker flipping, crypto trading. And so I started to just focus more on, I guess, like the underlying concepts of what we're doing here. What this digital economy means, what it means to have decentralized assets as we're heading into like this fully virtual kind of life that we're all going to have, and the importance of that. And there are challenges with talking about NFTs. The fact that everything is like a very small supply makes it very hard to talk about it without having an influence on the actual price, which is going to anger people every single time. And so how do you talk about individual projects without pissing some people off, without being called a shiller or a fudder or whatever it is? That I found very challenging, and I just sort of just stopped talking about NFTs specifically and just focus more on, like, I guess the quote macro of the space. Now I'm doing a newsletter where I do talk about NFTs specifically, and so I am trying to figure out a way to dance around that. But it is a challenge that I think a lot of people face, and they'd rather just like not say anything. And as a result, that's why I think a lot of rugs and low quality stuff goes as far as it does, because there's so much pushback whenever you talk about these projects. So that I think has been a big challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing. I mean, we talk a lot about that idea of like honesty in the space and trying to figure out like how to criticize, but also not like, come off as disingenuous, and trying to come from a place of knowledge and make sure that you have a sense of it. I think also this goes back to why these small kind of group discords are so important now, because so much of the information you get has to kind of be filtered through someone, whether it's like a close friend or a group of close friends or multiple small discords that allow you to do it. I will say one of the things I really appreciate about the Midnight Labs Discord is that it is a group of people who all seem thoughtful, right? Like, I think that we've all run into people who are not thoughtful. We all have in fact, one of the funniest things is, like there's a PFP group that probably people could guess that I'm part of, that when you go into that Discord, it feels very unthoughtful, and it's just a lot of reaction. It's like reactivity, and it's like, okay, I'm going to react to what's happening right now, or I'm going to be a specific person I know just literally reacts like every 10 seconds to whatever's going on in the market. And
you're like, we're going to guess what that PFP is, but that describes like 99% of PFP Discord.
Exactly.
That doesn't give us any information.
No. Well, you can't guess it, but everybody else in here probably can. But
okay.
But I think that the interesting thing about this is like, that's valuable, right? There is value in seeing like instant reaction, because weirdly that's a part of this market too, right? Like as we were talking about before, there are all these people in this market who are like instant reactors, and you have to be aware of what the psychology of that is. But ultimately, I think the real value comes from people who have spent time in the space, who understand the kind of it's not even like macro trends. It's more just like the ebbs and flows of what this space is because of what you've known or what's gone on. I think weirdly that the word I keep coming back to is, and this is kind of sound kind of lame, but is wisdom, right? Like there's a level of wisdom to people in Midnight Labs, and I'll also say the people who are in this group in Midcurve, which is a small Discord group that makes this podcast, and we've talked about here, but like wisdom is like underrated, right? Like, and I think that it's like one of those things where like, yes, alpha is important in understanding what's going on with the macro, but like wisdom feels like the kind of thing where you've taken all this information and kind of can like dial it back and kind of get a sense of what's going on. Do you think about that, Giancarlo? Like in terms of like what information comes out and then like a filter that is put on it by experience?
Yeah, I do. And like you said, there alpha is also important. There's people that do that way better than us, that are always like looking for the latest arbitrage and are on the cutting edge of all those things. That to me has just never been as interesting, even though people have made a killing doing that over the past couple of years, or longer. But what I'm more interested in is sort of the evolving meta trend of like decentralized just memes, and also meeting the people that are pushing that forward. And so like one of the things we're focusing more on is like finding members that are building things of some, even if it's like content or NFTs or whatever, just like, are you doing something as opposed to just kind of skimming on the sidelines? And because I think network over the next few years is going to be also huge. One of the coolest things about the NFT space right now is that nobody's like famous, right? Like they might be famous within our little bubble, but nobody's like too well known where they're just going to be like stuck up and not talk to you. At least that's been my experience. And so you can rub shoulders with people that you sort of know are going to be a big deal and that are, maybe geniuses in some regard, and that are going to become way more famous than they are now. But they're just hanging out in small discords. And so that to me is a big focus. Like I just want to meet more people that are doing things. And that, it's fulfilling just because you meet the coolest people in the space right now and the most creative. But then also just from a career perspective, it's just the smart thing to do, I think, as opposed to just like trading the shit coin of the day. Just meet the people who are going to make the big moves down the road, because it is like an information based economy as well, and the asymmetry in information is often what leads to people having like these outsized returns, and so that to me is like, in terms of alpha, that's like a long-term alpha play.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I think networks are often underestimated, right? I think that's a really smart take.
And there's going to be a lot of these groups, right? Like it's not like it's not like we're trying to dominate the market. There's no way you can dominate the market because of the nature of how small these groups can be or have to be. Like once you reach 500, 1,000 people, it starts to break down a bit, and it's hard to keep that culture intact. And already some people have like complained. They're like, well, I can't read everything anymore where I used to be able to read everything. And we're still like at 150, 200 people. So we're still pretty small. And so I can already imagine that, at some point, maybe we cut the supply from what we originally thought we were going to have, because what's the point of having 2,000 people if it waters down everything? And so the nature of these groups having to be like less than, say, 500 people means that there's going to be a ton of them. And I think we're all just going to have like, in our digital lives, we're just going to have several of these groups that are aligned with different interests that we have. And so I might have like my Web3 builder group. I might have like my LA, what are we doing tonight group. And you're just going to have like a dozen of these, and it's just going to be common for everyone to have that same structure, I think.
Yep, I think that's very true. And I think one of the things, I mean, just from a personal standpoint, I can tell you right now is that like Midcurve and Midnight Labs are kind of two of my home bases in the space. And I get different things out of each of them, right? Like with Midcurve, there's a lot of people in Midcurve that I've known for a long time. Also, as you've heard on this podcast, between Grant and Salty and Eric are very much smarter minds than I when you look at the financial world. And then in Midnight Labs, what's kind of cool is like it's a lot of people. I've also built projects in the space. It's a lot of people who I know have built projects and done things. And also like weirdly, it's people like Cult Artists or J Club. I think that's how you could say his name, but both of which are like in the world of me looking at dumb degenerate projects, right? And like getting a different opinion from those things. So it's like I think the biggest thing you can do is like expand out your circle of influence, right? Like with any sort of scenario, the more kind of like the better signal you can get when it comes to the signal to noise ratio, the better you're going to be set up. And I think that to me, the best signal right now is coming from these small groups. And I think that these exist on Telegram as well, too. There's a couple people in Midcurve who are in a couple big CT Telegram groups. And that's an interesting circle, depending on what you want to get out of it. But like the more interesting thing to me is like, how do you up the level of signal to noise ratio? And I think the other thing I'll say is, something I've thought recently is that it's probably worth not spending time in places where that isn't the case. And I think we've a lot of people have thought about this is like, if the noise ratio is too high, you really have to start making a call for yourself, both for your own sanity, but also for like what you're getting out of it. Do I need to spend my time here, right? Like, and I think we're all in a world where time is finite, and I think that's a really interesting take on it as well. What about anybody else have something else for Giancarlo before we probably wrap up here?
Giancarlo, when utility for Prometheans? I'm extremely underwater. Please help.
So I guess for people that don't know, Prometheans was like this, I guess, like open edition drop that I did, where if anyone remembers the button on Reddit, you guys remember that? Anyone?
Of course.
Okay, so yeah, it's sort of like, it was very inspired by the button on Reddit, but like on chain. And so you have this timer, it goes down from 15 minutes to 0, and every time someone mints an NFT, it comes up back up to 15. And when it hits 0, the mint's over forever. So theoretically, it was like this unlimited mint. And it ended up like a lot of people minted it. It got over 50,000, like I think 55,000 profile pics were minted over like 3 months or 4 months, where 24/7 around the clock, people were minting it every few minutes, which is like insane. Like the first night when I went to bed, I was like, I'm going to wake up and this thing's going to be dead on the first day. But I just kept getting surprised every morning. I would wake up and it was still there. But yeah, I knew it's very different because it isn't relying on speculation. And I think 90% of people get that. But of course, you're going to have like 5-10% of people who are like, they've been primed to think about NFTs as investment vehicles and this very specific thing. And so now I have like reply guys every day, just like, when are we going to burn these 50,000? It'd be a great idea if instead of 50,000, there were only 500. You have any plans for that? But I kind of expected that'd be the case.
Yeah, I actually love that this happened, and it's a really interesting conversation around like what use cases of NFTs are. I mentioned this, I think, last week on the show, but there's that project McPepe's that just came out. Are you familiar with that, Giancarlo? Did you see that?
I think I looked at it briefly.
So McPepe's was this really interesting kind of like, I really dug it because it was AI art based, but ostensibly the idea was that they were creating an infinite amount of AI Pepes, right? And that was from the get-go, that was the storyline, blah, blah, blah. And they just capitulated this week and shut off the Genesis mint at 42,000 or 4690 or whatever, some sort of meme number. But it's interesting because, like, of course, you get all this pressure to do this thing, even though like the idea of it was much more interesting as a purely infinite play, right? Except this is the problem you run into with situations like this, where like, okay, who's buying in? How do you control who's buying in? Like, you were very, very clear about what this project was from the beginning, but like, when people see it, it's impossible for your words to carry into every single person's ears as they look at this thing and they kind of do this thing. So I do think we're going to kind of end up in the world where we're going to have to like see these experiments get bought by people who don't understand them going forward still.
And also it points to the pressures that, if I was getting this kind of pressure just on even with the transparency that I gave around this project, you can imagine what any quote roadmap PFP founder, what kind of pressure they get to optimize for the short term, right? It's probably insane. It seems like whenever you launch any kind of NFT, you're just like indebted for life now to whoever bought in. And any strategies that you might have that might produce some kind of long-term benefit, but takes time, is always going to be like deprioritized for something that is just going to get people off your back like this week. Like, Jesus Christ, like, here's a token, here's a burn, like, leave me alone, let me sleep. I imagine that's just
exactly
been the wave in the space for so long that's why a lot of these projects they fail, because they're just really optimizing for this loud minority in Discord and on Twitter, who are just in it, and they're just gonna flip it as soon as you give them the first catalyst, and they're not loyal at all. And so, yeah, I think we just have to sort of change our mindset. But it is tough because that is all you only see those types of people minting these projects, and so it's kind of like Momoguru right now. They're kind of declining because they fed into a lot of these groups that are just these short-term traders, and so I don't know. I don't know how this gets solved, because you can't really optimize for the consumer that isn't here, that might be more of a long-term thinker, but they're not minting projects right now, and so it's sort of a circular thing that's hard to get out of.
Well, as much as I agree with you that, it's hard to talk about NFTs when, there's 1K to 10K supply, the reality is we don't have enough people in the space to support, all the blue chips or aspiring blue chips, right? And if someone like Momoguro, is really feeding that narrative of, oh, like we're X Pixar, X Disney, we're going to make this game and make that and all that and charge, 0.22 ETH times 9K supply in this market, like they deserve what's coming to them, right? Whereas, if you're being a patient builder and a creator who's launching free projects, like yourself, that criticism is certainly less deserved, in my opinion, right? And I think the name of the game right now is patience, right? Because most people believe it's, the end of the world, end of times, and it's not, right? Things always bounce back, and it won't be in the exact same form or structure, but I think NFTs are here to stay, and it's just a matter of, as we talked about earlier, growing your network and figuring out what works.
Yep, totally. I think the patience is key. Okay, let's wrap up here. Giancarlo, before we go, we always kind of say something we're looking forward to in the course of this week. I know we have a weird week here.
It's an insane question this week.
Yes, I know. But here, I'm gonna pick something first, and you guys are welcome to pick something that's very specific to now, or you can pick something a little bit less. This is a kind of a bigger thing that I'm really interested in that happened at ETH Denver that I think we've talked a little bit about, but not that much about, but it continues to be more interesting to me. And this is kind of to Giancarlo's point. It was the announcement of that ERC 4337. The standard has been kind of released into the world. It's a complicated thing, but I urge everybody listening to this to dig into it. The ability to do a whole lot more stuff with smart wallets is coming. And one of the more interesting things or a couple of interesting things I think that this allows is sponsorship NFTs or crypto assets where you could have an ongoing kind of subscription. Subscription. Sponsorships also, but subscription is something that's really important to me. The idea that the subscription model has worked in the Web2 world to really change the entire business model around SaaS companies, around all sorts of other things, made a massive difference in that space. I think that the idea that you could have a subscription model in this world could be really interesting. Also, I think it's really shitty a lot of times that projects that are doing interesting stuff get kind of like a one-time mint out cost and then have something else. This also could be a way around the royalties conversation. The other thing that's really interesting is you can do sponsored mints, which means that like you could actually have free mints where the project founder would pay the gas as well. So there's all sorts of interesting things that are happening with this. I think it's probably not getting enough attention for what it is. I really want to see when somebody comes out with projects that have kind of integrated this in an interesting way. Oh, and also, by the way, the other thing about this is interesting is that like it talks about different ways to get recovery of your wallet. So, this might be a way around the 12-word seed phrase that makes it a little bit easier for people to kind of recover assets. So I think in general, this is just, we talk about the space moving forward. This really feels like a big thing to me. So I think that that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. Giancarlo, what are you looking forward to in like next week or so in the space?
So I've been getting into what's called post photography, which is a form of AI that is looks like photographs. I don't know if there's a better way to describe them, but they tend to be surreal or there's just something different about them from just normal real life. And this week there's a pass coming out for that from Fellowship, and
Cool.
it's just a Dutch auction pass. I'll probably overspend on it. AI art in general feels maybe a little toppy right now. So I'll buy the top, but it is like this genre that I'm getting more into, and I'm just having fun. I'm having fun with it in a time where there's not much else that's exciting in the space, I think.
Yeah, what's the name of that guy? It's Rainier or something? The guy who was the most recent Brain Drops drop.
Roop Rainisto?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Life in the West. That's exactly right. Which are incredible. Everybody should go look at them. But like, I think that's a pretty good example of what you're talking about, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I actually spoke to him yesterday for the newsletter, and he was like explaining to me how it actually is done, like in the back end. It's very interesting, and I think it lends well to photography. Like he was telling me that as a photographer, one thing you do is you take like 1 million photos, you go back and you just kind of narrow and curate that down to a very small set from everything you took. And it's similar to what he does with these models, where he'll do all these prompts. He'll train the model a certain way, and then he'll go to bed. He'll wake up, and there'll be like 15, 20,000 images, and then his job as the artist is to really curate this down. And he said with the one that you mentioned, Life in West America, he had 15,000 images that he then curated down to 500.
Yeah, it's one of the things. So I've done an AI project, as people in here may know, about Old Men with White Beards, and I'm working on kind of a version of that as well. And one of the interesting things when you do AI art is like a lot of it is prompting, and people always think, well, it's about writing the prompts, and if you write the prompts, like it's not that hard to do. And it's like the hard part is the sheer amount of volume you have to kind of go through to find the things you want. And it is interesting. Like I could do a whole series of podcasts on this, but I really believe the coming AI content boom is going to be much more about curation than it is about curation, because creation is going to be much easier than it ever was before. That doesn't mean that creation is going to go away, but I think curation is going to be like a massive, massive part of it. So I think that's super interesting. I think it's worth looking at. Okay, what about you, Eric? Anything else coming up this week you're looking forward to, other than solvency or not?
There's a new brain drops release or from a human that I think I'm looking forward to. Actually, on the fence about whether or not to just pick up a GAN today to complete my day one set. And then obviously the LACMA Cactoid Gallery Mint is for phase 1 on Monday. That has a lot of really cool artists that I'm excited to see. So really they had some bumps in that mint process, but really excited to see how that one goes. And then I think just I'm kind of on a bit of a PFP break. I've just been spending more time kind of figuring out stuff on the art side, just because people are doing really interesting things. And I was really looking forward to the Claire's show in Paris, but that obviously went the way that it did. So it is kind of disappointing, and it sucks that happened to her. But I don't really think it changes the trajectory of AR in general. I think this year is going to be sort of a coming age moment for the medium. I'm hoping that a lot more of these artists, practitioners in the ecosystem, get the due that they deserve.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it is Claire is in my mind a kind of shining light for both not only AI art but NFT artists, and I think it's a bummer how that went down. I think she's really one of the better educators on AI art too. And one of the things, as somebody who's done some AI art stuff, is that there's a lot of negativity in the world, not just in NFTs, obviously, but across the entire art spectrum around AI art, because there is this argument about like, what did you really do? And I think when you look at people like Claire or Life in the West, like you can tell there's actually like real significant work that's going in. And a huge part of AI art in general, I think, is educating people to the understanding that there is art. Okay, what about you, Grant? What are you looking forward to this week?
I don't have an answer you'll like. I think we're gonna continue to see people panic, blame creators, blame Blur, blame whoever they can without taking personal responsibility. You love to see it, obviously. And yeah, I think outside of JPEGs, it's kind of the end game for the markets here, right? It's time for the Fed to decide if they want to step in or let this ride and see how much more pain they can cause without other things breaking outside of this little tech bubble. Like I would wager a solid amount that Silicon Valley Bank isn't the only institution in America or elsewhere in the world, for that matter, with a duration mismatch in assets and liabilities that are going to come calling soon. So I do think this is the end game in the coming weeks.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. We didn't even get into this, but there's the conversation that's definitely going on about, and I think, Grant, you even maybe mentioned something around this, where like it may be up to the Fed now to like understand that this is the hikes have to come back in order to kind of fix this in some ways. But it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch how that plays out just on a macro level. Okay, Salty, what about you? What are you looking forward to this week? Anything specific?
Yeah, USDC repegging. Just kidding. That
But
term
wait a
doesn't
second. You
make
said
any
it's not.
sense.
It's yeah, exactly. What are you talking about? You're the one who just explained the whole thing that it doesn't make sense. USDC recovering, is that fair enough to say?
I don't know. Well, USDC redemptions. That's all that matters. Price on chain's irrelevant.
Okay.
It's just a
Yep.
sweet ARB if you can buy it for cheap and redeem it. So yeah, I mean, of course, we're all looking forward to Monday to see what happens. And how aggressively the government steps in to reassure. I mean, it's an existential thing. Is like the government needs to keep us like from rioting in the streets and people from having nothing to lose. So a big part of that is confidence that their money in the bank is there. So I'm interested to see how that shapes up. Interested to see what the price of these stables shakes out to, and how this helps boost the awareness of immutable stables and how those projects go. And also, I'm interested to see what we see across like alts and even the major tokens. As I don't know, come Monday if people are going to be like flooding out of the space, but if liquidity
Get
is
me
drained,
out, or yeah.
yeah, like I don't know if people are just waiting or people are going to bid the bottom or the dips are going to keep coming, but liquidity is draining out. It's just going to be smaller and smaller chunks of the pie to fight over. But I don't know. I really can't guess as to if that'll happen or not. Also, I had to say to Giancarlo too. You were talking about your earlier YouTube stuff, and I just in mid 2021, man, you were the one person with like YouTube videos I could tolerate watching. Like really the lone voice in the wilderness.
Appreciate
So
that.
even if you maybe didn't know everything you were doing at the time, I'm grateful you did what you did back then. It's good stuff.
Thanks, man.
That's awesome. Well, we're gonna wrap up here as a longer one, but it's so awesome to have Giancarlo. Thank you for joining us this week. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. Fun.
Okay, everybody, we will see you next week. Hopefully there will be a crypto industry. Hopefully there'll be a financial industry that's left after whatever happens in the next 5 to 7 days. But thanks so much. We really appreciate it, and we will talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye, everybody.